Hello everyone. Welcome back to the Ghost Story channel of Duway. I hope you all have a thrilling time listening to today's ghost story. Before diving in, don't forget to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel to receive the latest ghost story videos. Now, let's jump into today's tale. The first story carries a hint of the supernatural, involving possession, but it's not entirely about that. This story was shared by a girl named Noyette, who said it took place at her grandmother's house. Noyette's grandmother had only one child, Noyette's mother. After growing up, her mother got married and moved out to live with her husband, leaving her grandmother alone. Since her grandmother only had one child, there was no one to take care of the house, ancestral altar, and graves. Despite her aging years, Noyette's grandmother didn't want to live with her daughter and son-in-law. She insisted on staying in her own house to take care of the family's ancestral worship. Noyette's grandfather had passed away a long time ago, and since her mother got married, her parents often visited her grandmother to ensure she wasn't lonely living alone. One weekend, Noyette's parents planned to visit her grandmother. However, due to some work commitments, they told Noyette to visit her grandmother first, and they'd follow in a few days. Noyette packed her things and headed to her grandmother's house. When she arrived, she knocked on the door but found the house completely shut. The front door, windows, and even the back door were all closed tightly. This was unusual because her grandmother always kept the windows open during the day to let the breeze in, as she rarely used fans. Noyette called out repeatedly, "Grandma, I'm here to visit you." But there was no response. Normally, her grandmother was always at home and rarely went out. Noyette knocked persistently, but still there was no answer. Suddenly, she heard a voice from the back of the house calling her name, "Noyette, Noyette." The voice wasn't her grandmother's. Curious, Noyette went to check the back door, but found it locked. She looked around, but saw no one. Confused, she returned to the front door and resumed calling for her grandmother. As she approached the front door again, she suddenly felt chills and goosebumps. The door, which had been locked, mysteriously opened on its own. Standing inside the house, she saw her grandmother in the corner of the room, not near the door. Overjoyed to see her grandmother, Noyette forgot about the strange occurrence of the door opening by itself. However, her grandmother didn't turn to greet her. Instead, she faced the wall, showing no reaction to Noyette's arrival. This was unusual because her grandmother was always happy to see her. Noyette asked, "Grandma, what were you doing? I've been calling for so long, and you just opened the door now." Her grandmother didn't respond. With a cold expression, she turned and walked straight to the kitchen. Noyette, puzzled by her grandmother's behavior, followed her inside. It was already late afternoon, and as usual, Noyette unpacked her things and prepared for dinner. However, her grandmother remained silent, and the two didn't exchange any words. During dinner, her grandmother prepared the meal as usual. But when Noyette sat down, she noticed something odd. The dishes were not the typical meals her grandmother would cook. Instead of familiar dishes like braised pork or boiled vegetables, there was a plate of something strange, a dish made of rat meat. It was the first time Noyette had ever seen such a dish. The rat was cut into pieces, resembling a dish of stir-fried rat with lemongrass and chili. Shocked, Noyette asked her grandmother about it. "What kind of dish is this, Grandma?" Grandma only replied with one sentence, "Fried field mouse." Throughout the entire meal, she only said that one sentence and didn't speak to Noyette at all. What was strange was that both of them sat at the table, but only Noyette ate. She noticed her grandmother didn't pick up any food or even serve herself rice. Curious, Noyette asked, "Grandma, aren't you eating? Should I get you some rice?" Her grandmother shook her head, refusing to eat. The entire meal, her grandmother only drank water. Since her grandmother seemed unusually quiet, Noyette didn't dare ask more questions. She simply thought her grandmother must already be full and just wanted her to eat. That day was the first time Noyette visited her grandmother's house, and she found it quite boring. Her grandmother didn't talk, and life in the countryside was quiet, with everyone going to bed early. After dinner, her grandmother turned off the main light and went to her room. Noyette, however, stayed outside on the wooden bench in front of the house, scrolling through her phone. Initially, she planned to scroll for a bit, go to the back of the house to shower, and then head to bed. They didn't share a room. They each had their own. While using her phone, Noyette unexpectedly fell asleep. She woke up in the middle of the night, startled from her light slumber. Groggily, she opened her eyes and glanced toward her grandmother's room. She saw a figure moving strangely, swaying side to side and walking incredibly fast, nothing like her grandmother's usual slow pace. Looking closer, she realized the figure didn't resemble her grandmother at all. It moved unnaturally, almost creepily, heading straight into her grandmother's room. Terrified, she thought she might be dreaming. Rubbing her eyes, she confirmed she was awake. Gathering her courage, she decided to check her grandmother's room to see who had entered. When she entered, she found her grandmother sitting in a corner, holding a hairdryer and drying her hair. The sound of the dryer filled the room. Startled by Noyette's sudden entrance, her grandmother looked at her in surprise and asked, "What's the matter? Why did you come in so suddenly?" Her grandmother's tone was completely normal, not eerie at all. Relieved, Noyette told her grandmother what she had seen earlier. Her grandmother brushed it off, saying, "There's no one here. Go take a shower. It's late, and you haven't bathed yet." Taking her grandmother's advice, Noyette grabbed her clothes and headed to the bathroom at the back of the house. As she showered, she heard a knock on the door. Then a voice called out, "Noyette, Noyette." The voice sounded exactly like her grandmother's. It was the same voice that had called her earlier in the day when her grandmother hadn't opened the door. The voice came from the area near the bathroom door. At that moment, Noyette felt a deep unease, as if something was off in her grandmother's house. Too scared to scream, she hurriedly finished her shower. While drying off and getting dressed, she glanced at the small window above the bathroom wall meant for ventilation. To her horror, she saw a face pressed against the window, grinning widely. Terrified, she quickly wrapped herself in a towel, threw on her clothes, and ran straight to her grandmother's room, although she usually slept in a separate room. That night, she was too frightened and decided to sleep with her grandmother. When she entered, her grandmother was lying against the wall, facing away from her, already asleep. Not wanting to disturb her, Noyette quietly lay down beside her, trying to calm herself and fall asleep. Usually, sleeping next to her grandmother brought her a sense of peace. But that night was different. Despite being exhausted, she felt uneasy and couldn't relax. She tossed and turned for a while before finally drifting off. In her dream, Noyette saw the door to her grandmother's room slowly opening. In the dream, she was sitting on the bed, staring at the door as it creaked open. Standing outside the door was her grandmother, peeking in with a panicked, fearful expression. Her grandmother seemed desperate to tell her something, but could only whisper faintly, "Noyette, Noyette, that person is—" Before she could finish, Noyette jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Her heart raced, and she noticed the bed trembling slightly from her sudden movement. She turned to check on her grandmother, who was still lying next to her. Her grandmother woke up and asked, "Did you have a nightmare?" It was a roasted eggplant, an eggplant that gets burnt when grilled. The charred skin of the eggplant peeled off, resembling what was happening. At this moment, her grandma's face was also smeared with blood, which trickled down slowly. Her eyes, out of nowhere, had blood vessels bulging and turning red, as if something eerie was happening. Noyette couldn't tell what was real or a dream because her grandma had just spoken to her moments ago, acting completely normal. But now everything seemed so strange. Noyette started stepping backward, moving out of the room, while her grandma remained seated on the bed. She didn't approach or harm Noyette at all. Standing by the door, Noyette suddenly heard her grandma speak. But the voice was no longer hers. It was a peculiar voice, neither entirely male nor female. The figure said, "Do you think I'm really your grandma?" That was all it said. At that moment, Noyette was terrified. She burst through the door and ran as fast as she could, heading straight into the village, screaming loudly. Hearing her cries, the villagers came rushing to see what had happened at Grandma High's house. Noyette, overwhelmed with fear, stood outside crying, unable to explain much. All she could stammer was, "There's a ghost in my house." The men of the village decided to investigate, entering the house to see if there was any truth to Noyette's claims. They searched for Grandma Hai, assuming she and Noyette had been startled by something supernatural. However, they couldn't find Grandma Hai anywhere. A group of 5 to 7 men scoured the house, but found no trace of her. Noyette, too frightened to speak, couldn't provide any answers. The men, unable to find Grandma Hai, decided to leave and return in the morning to resolve the matter. However, as they were about to exit the house, they noticed a foul smell, a stench that grew stronger the closer they got to the door. Something compelled them to turn back and search the house again to locate the source of the smell. They eventually reached Grandma Hai's room. Noyette stood outside, watching as the men searched every corner of the room. They checked under the bed, and when they shone their flashlights into the dark space, they discovered a bloated corpse. It was Grandma Hai. Her body was swollen but not decomposed, indicating she had been dead for several days. Noyette was in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. Who was the woman she had seen earlier? And why was her grandma's body under the bed? The men immediately contacted the local authorities, who arrived to investigate. By the next day, the results revealed no signs of foul play. Grandma Hai had passed away due to natural causes, possibly a sudden illness. It seemed she might have wandered under the bed in confusion before her death. The family was devastated by the news, unable to believe she had died in such an unusual manner. Despite their grief, they arranged a proper funeral and burial for Grandma Hai. On the 49th day after her passing, Noyette had a strange dream. In the dream, she stood at the bottom of the staircase in her grandma's house, which had been locked up since her death. Grandma Hai's house was a 2-story building, and in the dream, Noyette saw her grandma standing on the stairs, about 10 steps above her. Grandma Hai had her back turned, looking upwards. The wind was chilly, and her grandma wore a thin, light outfit, which made Noyette call out, "Grandma, aren't you cold? Put on a coat." In the dream, Noyette didn't realize her grandma had already passed away. She kept calling, but her grandma didn't respond or turn around. After a few moments, Grandma Hai began descending the stairs, but she was walking backward, step by step. She moved closer to Noyette without ever turning to face her. When they were only 1 step apart, Noyette still couldn't see her grandma's face. In that fleeting moment of silence, Noyette suddenly heard a peculiar rattling sound near her ears, a continuous clinking noise. Clack, clack, clack. Startled, she opened her eyes and realized she had just woken from a dream. Turning to her right, she noticed beside her pillow a toy drum, a small drum with 2 strings attached, which makes noise when shaken. It was the kind of drum children often play with. Initially shaken by her dream, Noyette felt even more unsettled upon seeing the drum. This particular drum had sentimental value. It was a gift from her grandmother on one of her birthdays, but a long time ago. After her grandmother passed away, during the preparations for the funeral, the family had considered placing the drum in the coffin with her. However, Noyette couldn't part with it and decided to keep it, storing it in her cabinet back home in Saigon. Yet, inexplicably, the drum was now lying next to her. Who had placed it there? After the unsettling dream, Noyette was overcome with fear, but tried to reassure herself that perhaps her grandmother's spirit had returned to playfully visit her, out of love. She decided not to tell her parents about the dream. However, on the second night, while sleeping, she didn't dream, but suddenly woke up feeling an icy coldness throughout her body. She was paralyzed and couldn't move. When she opened her eyes, she saw a shadowy figure in the corner of her room, near her study desk. The figure had no discernible head or neck, just a hand holding the toy drum she had put back in the cabinet the day before. Fear surged through her as her body remained frozen, her mouth unable to call out for her parents. The shadow pointed the drum directly at her face and began moving closer and closer to her bed. Just as the shadow reached her bedside, another shadowy figure appeared, grabbing the hand of the first figure and leading it out of her room. The second shadow then placed the drum back beside her pillow, just as it had been the previous night, before disappearing. Noyet had no idea who the second shadow was. The next morning, shaken, she decided to tell her parents everything. Early that morning, she gathered her parents in the living room to recount the events of the previous night. As the three of them were talking, there was a knock at the door. It was her father's old friend, Aunt Nom, who hadn't visited in a long time. The family found it odd, as they hadn't been in contact for years, and Aunt Nom rarely came over. When asked why she had come, Aunt Nom explained that she wanted to check on the family after hearing about the passing of Noyet's grandmother. However, that wasn't her only reason for visiting. She turned to Noyet and asked, "Do you know who saved you last night?" Stunned, Noyet asked how Aunt Nom knew about what had happened. Aunt Nom, who was known to have a spiritual connection but wasn't a professional medium, revealed that the spirit of Noyet's grandmother had visited her the previous night, seeking her help. Aunt Nom explained that although she had known of Noyet's grandmother, they weren't particularly close, and she hadn't been aware of her passing until the spirit visitation. According to Aunt Nom, Noyet's grandmother had once been a spiritual practitioner, someone who dealt with charms and spells. In her prime, she had sealed away an evil spirit, instead of destroying the spirit entirely, which would have prevented it from reincarnating. She had chosen to merely bind it, hoping it might one day have a chance to reincarnate and start anew. However, over time, the spirit broke free and sought revenge. It waited until Noyet's grandmother had grown old and weak, no longer capable of defending herself, before attacking her. The spirit's vengeance led to her passing, which appeared to others as a natural death from old age. Aunt Nom further revealed that even after her grandmother's death, the vengeful spirit lingered, inhabiting her body and causing disturbances in the house. The day Noyet visited her grandmother's home, the spirit had intended to harm her but refrained because she was still a child. After the grandmother's body began to decompose, the spirit finally left but transferred its presence into the toy drum. The spirit had been lying in wait, planning to harm Noyet by using the drum as a vessel. Hearing this, Aunt Nom urged Noyet to retrieve the drum immediately. She intended to take it with her and perform a ritual to cleanse it, ensuring the spirit could no longer harm anyone. Seal that drum so the demon cannot wreak havoc and harm people anymore. Indeed, after everyone gave the drum to Ms. Name, they were quite surprised because no one expected that one day, inside such a small toy drum, there would be a demon residing within, trying to take their lives. Truly, after handing the drum to Ms. Nam, who then kept it, Noyet no longer saw the black shadow appearing in her dreams. From that day on, she no longer had nightmares, sleep paralysis, or dreams of her grandmother returning. Next is a story recounted by a teacher. She mentioned that it happened around the time close to the Tet holiday. After finishing her teaching duties, she and 5 other female teachers, who were all part of her close teaching group, decided to hang out. After eating and singing, they wanted to continue their outing but didn't know where to go. They eventually decided to visit Nock's house, the youngest teacher in their group, like the youngest sibling of the group. However, upon entering Nock's house, something unusual happened. As soon as they stepped through the door, they felt an intense chill, a coldness that seemed to seep into their spines, causing goosebumps all over. Initially, they thought it was just the contrast between the outdoor heat and the coolness of the house. Nock's house was made entirely of wood, part of a row of ancient wooden houses preserved by the government. Similar to the old town of Hoi, and renovating or repairing these houses required special permission. The house was dark and shadowy, with no windows on either side, but the back of the house faced a river, making it somewhat cool. However, the atmosphere inside was very gloomy. While visiting Nock's house, they learned about her family situation. There were 5 people in the household, but 4 suffered from a strange condition. It wasn't exactly a disease, but rather peculiar symptoms. Only Nock's mother was unaffected. The affected family members were silent, rarely speaking, and always seemed withdrawn. They could eat 2 or 3 bowls of rice, but never felt full, and none of them were overweight. Nock's father had once left home, but later returned. Initially, Nock didn't show any symptoms, but over time, she too began exhibiting the same behavior. Being a teacher, she stopped interacting with her students, teaching only minimally without any engagement. Later, a man named Hai, who lived next door and was also a physical education teacher at the same school, started showing similar symptoms. He became withdrawn and stopped talking to anyone. Returning to that day, when the group visited Knock's house, they played cards to pass the time. One of the teachers, who didn't know how to play cards, sat on a hammock nearby, scrolling on her phone. She jokingly decided to take a picture of the group playing cards, teasing them that she would send it to the principal. She snapped a photo of the card game and stored it on her phone. A few days later, while at school, she accidentally opened the photo and noticed something strange. In the picture, at the spot where the cards were placed, near a teacher named Ni, who was known to be the most timid in the group, there was a small child's hand. The hand was tiny, with 5 clear fingers resting on the cards. She showed the photo to others, but they dismissed it as a trick of the light. However, upon closer inspection, they realized it couldn't have been sunlight because the house had no windows on either side, and the curtains were drawn with the lights on. There was no way sunlight could create such a distinct image of a hand. Initially, they didn't want to show the photo to Knock, fearing it would scare her. But eventually, the teacher couldn't hold back and showed it to Knock, asking if it was a child's hand. Knock nonchalantly replied, "Yes, it's a child's hand. I'm used to it." Every night, the spirit tormented them, making everyone in the house behave oddly. To this day, her family performs monthly rituals to appease the child's spirit. Otherwise, it would wreak havoc on their household. The next story, which is quite intense, happened several years ago. The teacher only dared to share it after everything concluded because it was so terrifying. At that time, despite being a music teacher, throughout the year, she entrusted her children to the teachers and returned home, always ensuring to educate her kids well. She loved her children dearly. That year marked her first year teaching at this school. Every day, she would see a particular parent frequently visiting to check on her child's progress. However, by the second year, this parent stopped coming to observe her child, which seemed unusual. She found it odd, but didn't feel comfortable asking anyone about it, as she wasn't particularly close to the parent in question. One day, she overheard rumors from the teachers that the parent had been diagnosed with late-stage breast cancer and was now bedridden, awaiting her final days. In a coffin placed in front of the house, it was clear the parent had passed away. Initially, she thought death was the end, but it was only the beginning of a series of strange events. Later, she heard from neighbors that on the day of the parent's passing, her body was laid on a wooden platform in front of the house, with a coffin prepared nearby. A nun arrived to chant prayers for her, and the neighbors gathered to help the family with the funeral arrangements. The deceased was still young, leaving behind 2 small children in 1st and 2nd grade, with the husband and children crying uncontrollably. The children, too young to fully grasp the situation, were wailing for their mother, breaking everyone's hearts. While the nun continued chanting prayers, a sudden loud scream was heard from outside the house. Everyone turned to look, but saw no one. When they turned back to the coffin, they were shocked to see the deceased had opened her eyes, staring blankly at the ceiling, though her body was already placed in the coffin and surrounded by burial items. She had indeed come back to life. After confirming she was alive, her husband was overjoyed, but the neighbors were terrified and fled. Only the nun remained, understanding that she was not a ghost, but had genuinely revived. However, she exhibited no movement or reactions, lying still and silent. Eventually, they removed the burial items and helped her sit up. Many neighbors, frightened by the incident, moved away temporarily. The funeral was canceled, and she returned to living as a normal person. However, she never spoke again. She would sit quietly, staring at the ceiling, unlike her previous nurturing self. Her husband, though puzzled, was relieved she was alive. Over time, life carried on. The rats' bodies were intact, except for missing heads and tails. People initially thought it was the work of a peculiar cat. Then, chickens started disappearing. The breast cancer that had previously claimed part of her chest had left an infected, festering wound. Despite her revival, the wound continued to deteriorate, exposing her ribs, which became infested with maggots. Her husband had been caring for her, cleaning the wound daily. But that night, after finishing the cat, she began peeling away the rotting flesh around her ribs and even pulled out a rib bone herself. The horrifying sight left her husband in utter shock. It's all rotten. She didn't come back to life anymore. She had truly passed away. The woman sharing this story also mentioned that the period from when the corpse of this woman came back to life until the day she truly died lasted about 2.5 to 3 years. During those 2+ years, she lived like a moving corpse. Occasionally, she would speak, but she was always gloomy and eerie, which made her children move away because they couldn't stay there anymore. You can imagine how terrifying it was. By the time this woman truly passed away, her husband knew that it wasn't normal and that his wife couldn't possibly come back to life again. It was just too horrifying. He instructed the funeral workers to nail and drill the coffin lid securely so it wouldn't open again. After sealing the coffin, they also screwed it tightly with numerous screws, making it impossible to open the lid. That night, they rushed to bury her immediately. The woman who shared this story said that every day, she would pass by this woman's house on her way to school to teach. Each time she passed by, she would get goosebumps and feel extremely uneasy. Hearing the story from others was already frightening, and even weeks or months later, the fear lingered. Just looking at the house gave her chills. And with that, today's story comes to an end. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes to come. Thank you and goodbye. Hello everyone. Welcome back to Dewey's Ghost Story channel. I hope you all enjoy an exciting session of ghost stories today. Once again, we will dive into the spooky tales sent by our dear viewers to Dewey's channel. If any of you have ghost stories to share, feel free to send them to Dewey via Gmail or the Zalo number displayed on the screen. Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel to stay updated with the latest ghost story videos. Dewey sincerely thanks everyone for your support. Now, let's begin today's story. The first story was shared by a male viewer. He mentioned that this incident happened in Go-Vap district around September 2020. At that time, he had just started working as a security guard for a residential area, which was similar to an apartment complex or a newly built building. It was a fresh construction, so everything was still quite new. He was assigned to guard Block A, which consisted of multiple floors. While on duty, he noticed that about 10 steps away from his station, there was a community room. This room was spacious, but still under construction and not yet in use. Interestingly, inside this community room, there was an altar. He wasn't sure who it was dedicated to, but the room was filled with talismans pasted on the walls. Initially, nothing unusual happened until one day when a construction team asked him to unlock the room so they could continue their work on it. Since he had the key, he obliged and opened the door. The workers then requested him to move the altar out of the room to make their job easier. He complied and moved the altar outside. From that moment, strange occurrences began. Every night, he would hear sounds resembling someone hammering or chiseling the walls. At first, he thought it might be residents doing some renovation work, but the noises persisted night after night, making him suspicious. After all, it was an odd time for anyone to be doing such activities. One day, while using the restroom in his station, he noticed a ventilation hole. As he glanced through it, he saw a face. The skin on the face was dry and cracked, resembling dried cement. Terrified, he fainted on the spot. When he regained consciousness, he found himself in the local medical station. The emergency staff told him it was likely just his imagination due to stress. Although shaken, he decided to continue working there. However, the following days were no less eerie. One night, while working overtime due to a heavy workload, he noticed shadows moving in and out of the community room, even though the door was locked and he had the key. Thinking it might be thieves, he checked but found no one. Overwhelmed with fear, he left the building and spent the night at a nearby convenience store. The experience left him utterly exhausted. Last night, I couldn't sleep because I was on duty at the reception desk. I dozed off right there at the counter. While sleeping, I had a strange dream. In the dream, I saw a man standing in front of me at the reception desk. His face was pitch black, and I couldn't see him clearly. He pointed directly at my face and said, "Hey, why did you destroy my house? Do you know that's my place? You better rebuild it tomorrow or move somewhere else." Startled, I woke up and checked my watch. It was only 2:15 a.m. I was truly scared and didn't dare to sleep again. I rushed downstairs and told the security guard who had been working there for many years about the incident. After hearing my story, he calmly said, "Just get through tonight and tomorrow. Submit your resignation. This place is haunted. That block you're guarding?" Years ago, a construction worker fell from the scaffolding and died right there in the communal area. He was careless, and the accident happened. Since then, he's been lingering around. The management even set up an altar to appease his spirit, but every guard who works there gets spooked. Hearing this, I was terrified. I stayed up until morning, bought offerings to make a small ritual, and wrote a resignation letter. I decided to quit that job. After escaping that ordeal, my wife and I rented a new place, also in Ghost-Episode district. We moved in and settled everything. During the daytime, we both went to work. That evening, we returned home late, around 7:40 p.m. My wife went to the bedroom to grab clothes for a shower, while I sat in the living room watching TV. Suddenly, I heard a man's voice calling my name, "Lock, lock." The voice started softly, then grew louder. I thought it was my wife calling, but when she finished her shower, I asked her, "Did you call me earlier?" She replied, "No, I didn't. But I clearly heard someone calling my name." Feeling uneasy, we continued with our evening routine. Around 8:30 p.m., while we were having dinner, the lady from the neighboring room came over and started chatting. She revealed, "Let me tell you the truth about your room. Before you moved in, there was a security guard living here. He had no family. One day, he died in the room, and no one knew until the landlord and neighbors discovered his stiff body. The authorities came to handle the situation, and he was buried by a charity group. But here's the strange part. After his burial, the landlord went into the room, hammered a nail into the floor in the middle of the house, and left. I'm the only one who knows about this." The neighbor continued, "Sometimes I still see him standing by the window of your room. Even though you two live here now, I occasionally see him walking from the bathroom to the living room." Hearing this, I was horrified. That night, after dinner, my wife and I decided to sleep upstairs in the loft instead of downstairs. Initially, nothing happened, but around 2:30 a.m., I woke up needing to use the restroom. Half asleep, I climbed down the metal stairs. The layout of the room was typical, with a window directly facing the staircase. As I descended, I glanced toward the window and froze. Standing outside was a man staring straight at me. His face was gaunt, his eyes lifeless and white, and his skin looked dry and shriveled as if he had been starved for years. He wore a white outfit, similar to traditional farmer clothing, and his body was skeletal. Terrified, I lost my footing and fell down the stairs, hitting my head against the railing. My wife rushed down, asking what had happened. I couldn't speak. I was in shock and had even wet myself in fear. When I finally calmed down after about 30 minutes, I told her what I had seen. She listened calmly and said, "Maybe he needs something. Tomorrow, I'll prepare an offering for him." It was still the middle of the night, so we tried to go back to sleep, though I was deeply unsettled. One day, a woman from the neighboring room walked past her room and asked her, "Hey, did something happen between you and your husband last night? Your face looks utterly lifeless." It was true. Her face had turned pale, devoid of any color, even into the morning. Taking the opportunity, she recounted the events of the previous night to this woman. The neighbor said, "See, I told you before to make offerings, but you didn't listen. Now it seems that the spirit has come back, probably asking you to make offerings." That evening, when the couple returned home from work, they prepared a meal offering for the spirit and performed the ritual that very night. That same night, the wife dreamt a man whose face was unclear. The man said, "Tomorrow morning, after work, offer me a cup of coffee and a cigarette. In the evening, prepare a simple vegetarian meal for me. Do this, and I will bless you." Startled, she woke up and realized that the man had recognized their sincerity. From that day onward, Every morning, they offer the man a cup of coffee and a cigarette, and in the evening, a small vegetarian meal. Thanks to this, the spirit no longer appeared to haunt them at the window or in their dreams. Moreover, their work became smoother, their business flourished, and they earned more money. Another story serves as a lesson, especially for men who have a habit of flirting with women on the streets. About 5 years ago, when the couple had just started dating, the man would travel from Bintan to Tan Binh every day to pick up his girlfriend for coffee. One day, while riding together to a cafe near Tan Binh, they passed a vacant lot. There, he noticed a young girl standing alone. She was stunningly beautiful, wearing a white top and a red skirt that flared out, making her look even more striking. Despite having his girlfriend on the back of his bike, he couldn't take his eyes off the girl. His girlfriend, noticing his distraction, tapped his back and said, "Really? Another girl? You can't stop staring, can you?" Embarrassed, they continued on their way. However, the image of the girl lingered in his mind. After reaching the cafe and spending the day together, he returned home. The next day, he developed a high fever of 40 degrees Celsius that wouldn't subside. Weak and unable to breathe properly, he informed his girlfriend that he couldn't visit her until he recovered. The fever lasted for 3 days. On the 4th day, feeling slightly better, he went to visit her around noon. While there, he felt cold and exhausted, as if something was wrong. Feeling drowsy, he went to lie down for a nap. When he woke up, he found himself surrounded by her family, all looking worried. They explained that he had been possessed by a female spirit. The spirit had spoken through him, saying, "He complimented my beauty when he passed by, so I followed him. I want him to be my husband." Although the spirit had left his body, the family was still concerned that she might return. They decided to take him to a spiritual master. At the temple, the head monk, who appeared to be in his late 60s, immediately said, "Your words have caused your trouble." The monk instructed him to kneel in the main hall while he prepared. The monk then placed a sacred robe over his shoulders. As he sat in meditation, he felt an intense burning sensation on his back, as if it were on fire. The pain was unbearable, and he screamed. After about 15 minutes, the monk removed the robe, and the pain subsided. The monk explained, "When you see someone, you should just move on. Why did you stare and compliment her? That's why she followed you." The monk gave him a blessed bracelet to wear, ensuring that the spirit wouldn't follow him again. He also warned him, in the future, whether dealing with the living or the dead, never provoke or tease anyone. If you sense something unusual, just walk away. Especially with spirits, they are quick to attach themselves to you. Since that day, he has been cautious and avoids looking back when encountering anything strange. Another story involves a man who worked as a manager for residential buildings. He used to be skeptical of spiritual matters until an incident in 2018 at a building he managed changed his perspective. The manager of an apartment complex in District 7 briefly discussed his office in the building. The office was originally part of a residential unit that had been divided into 2 sections by a thin gypsum wall. On one side was his workspace, and on the other side, his staff used it as a sleeping area. When he first started using the room as the management office, he noticed it was clearly a repurposed old apartment. His section even had a private restroom. During the first month, everything seemed normal. However, after a month, strange occurrences began happening. Every afternoon, he would sit at his desk, a chair similar to the one you're sitting on, and take a nap due to his heavy workload. On several occasions, while napping at his desk, he would hear the distinct sound of someone scratching the chair. The material of the chair made the scratching noise very noticeable. Additionally, there were times when he would hear the sound of water rushing from the restroom. Startled, he'd wake up, but all the noises would instantly stop. One particular day, he accidentally overslept during his nap and woke up to find it was already 7 p.m. Normally, he would leave the office by 5 p.m. sharp. Surprised by how late it was, he quickly packed up to leave. As he exited the room, he encountered 2 security guards who asked why he was leaving so late. He explained he had been exhausted and had fallen asleep. Looking up, he noticed a camera pointing directly at his office, which explained how the guards knew he was still inside. After assuring them he was fine, he left for home. A week later, he had to stay late at the apartment complex for a monthly residents meeting. The meeting ended around 9 p.m., and as he walked back to his office to collect his belongings, he passed by the swimming pool. Across the pool, he noticed a woman in a black dress with her hair down. Her face was unclear, but her red eyes stood out as they stared directly at him. He assumed it was just a resident and continued to his office. When he reached the office door, he noticed something odd. His chair, which he had left pushed back from the desk, was now turned around with its back facing outward. Confused, he stood there thinking about who might have entered his office. Suddenly, the chair spun back to its normal position on its own. Sitting in the chair was the same woman in the black dress he had seen by the pool. Her red eyes glared at him as she extended her arm unnaturally toward the window, which was several meters away. She then said in a chilling voice, "Go home. It's past time." Terrified, he fainted on the spot. When he regained consciousness, the two security guards were beside him. They told him he was the 10th manager to experience such incidents in that office. Previous managers had all encountered similar hauntings, some even fainting and requiring hospitalization. The guards explained that the office used to belong to the project manager during the building's construction. The project manager's 15-year-old daughter would bring him lunch every day. However, one day, while the manager was in a meeting elsewhere, something tragic happened to the girl. The story begins with a young girl waiting for her father in a temporary room within an unfinished construction site. Unfortunately, the building collapsed unexpectedly due to its incomplete state, tragically killing the 15-year-old girl. After the heartbreaking incident, her father was overwhelmed with grief, quit his job as a contractor, and disappeared, cutting all contact with everyone. No one has been able to trace his whereabouts since. Years later, the site was rebuilt into a proper apartment complex, but strange occurrences began to happen. Residents and workers reported being haunted, particularly in the same room where the girl had died. The management brought in spiritual practitioners to help the girl's spirit move on, but none succeeded. It was said that the girl's soul was waiting for her father to perform a ritual to set her free. However, with no way to contact him, the situation remained unresolved. Over time, it was believed that the girl, out of frustration, transformed into a vengeful spirit. The haunting was specific. She only appeared after 7 p.m., the time she used to bring dinner for her father and wait to go home with him. This led to the belief that she didn't want anyone working late in the room. One employee, after experiencing terrifying encounters, fell ill for a week and requested a transfer to another building, unable to bear the trauma. The room was eventually turned into a storage space. But sightings of the girl's spirit persisted, with reports of her walking back and forth in the room. In another story, a girl shared an eerie experience involving her family. Her grandmother, a Khmer spiritual practitioner, had a sacred altar at home adorned with flags and a painting of a deity referred to as Ka. The grandmother would channel this deity to perform rituals and fortune-telling. One day, the girl's father cut down a coconut tree in their backyard without seeking permission from the spirits residing there, as the grandmother had previously warned. That afternoon, the grandmother had a dream in which the girl's older brother appeared under her bed, pleading for help. Startled, she called the family and discovered the tree had been cut down. Furious, she instructed them to bring the boy to her immediately, fearing he might be taken by the spirits. When they arrived, the boy appeared pale and unresponsive, behaving unusually. The grandmother performed a ritual using a plate with protective charms, incense, and a glass of water. She questioned the spirits possessing the boy, but he remained silent, only smirking eerily. She realized multiple spirits had taken hold of him. The family watched in fear as the grandmother continued the ritual, determined to save her grandson from the spirit's grip. This round, they said, "Why did his father destroy my house? My house was being lived in, and they destroyed it. I couldn't handle it alone. It took 3 spirits possessing me for me to deal with this guy. Grandma knew about it, so she took a talisman, burned it, and dipped a bundle of incense into a glass of water. She then used the incense bundle to hit my older brother on the head. At that moment, he collapsed and fainted. Afterward, Grandma told my mother, "Let Polai here, don't move him. There are 3 spirits possessing him. One is from the coconut tree his father cut down a few days ago. Another is from the banyan tree at the end of the village, and the last one is from the land next to the house." Grandma warned, "That piece of land next to your house is very haunted. Nobody has ever been able to live there." While my older brother was still unconscious on the wooden bed, Grandma took his watch, started drawing what looked like talismanic symbols on it, and then handed it back to my mother, telling her to make sure he wore it for a week without removing it. A while later, my brother woke up, unaware of what had just happened. Grandma asked him if he had experienced anything strange recently. My brother replied that 2 days earlier, while bathing behind the house, he saw a woman who looked exactly like their mother. He called out to her, but she didn't respond and walked straight into the garden before disappearing. That night, he prayed and became ill the next day. It turned out that on the same day his father cut down the coconut tree, my brother saw the spirit and fell ill. Grandma, having dreamed about it, called him back home to resolve the situation. After everything was settled, they still prepared an offering to apologize to the spirits for disturbing their home. A few years later, the family moved away for unknown reasons, and nobody has been able to live on that land since. Even Grandma said the land was too haunted for anyone to stay. As for me, I also had a strange encounter when visiting Grandma's house. At the time, I was in boarding school and only came home on weekends. One weekend, I decided to go straight to Grandma's house after school. On the way, just a few houses away from Grandma's, I saw a woman named Lan, who lived nearby, setting up an offering on the roadside. She had laid out fruits and other items. Being a child, I didn't understand what it was for and thought she was simply preparing food. After she finished, I approached her and asked for a bunch of longans. Surprisingly, she gave them to me. I happily took the fruits home to eat. When I arrived at Grandma's house, she was lying on her bed. I sat at the foot of her bed, and we watched TV together. After some time, Grandma kept glancing into her room. About half an hour later, she called me over and asked, "Did you stop anywhere on your way here or do anything unusual?" I initially said no, but then remembered asking Lan for the fruits. When I told Grandma, she became very upset and exclaimed, "That was an offering for wandering spirits. Why would you take it?" She explained that the food was for ghosts and spirits, not for humans. I was terrified upon hearing this. Grandma then said she had seen a man sitting at the exact spot where I had been earlier. He wore slacks and a checkered shirt with a hat. She realized he must have followed me home because I had taken the offering. Since our house was filled with Buddhist altars, the spirit couldn't enter and had to stay in my shadow. Grandma immediately performed a ritual, making gestures as if she was throwing something out into the yard to send the spirit away. She explained that the man was a relative of Lan and had died from electrocution. That's why Lan had been making offerings for him. After learning this, I was so scared that I ran to Lana's house to ask her. She confirmed the story, saying the offerings were indeed for her cousin, who had passed away tragically. She admitted she shouldn't have given me the fruits, but said it was also my fault for asking. From that day on, I've been extremely cautious around offerings and never dare to approach them, let alone touch or take anything. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for more ghost stories. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for more chilling tales in the next episodes. Goodbye and take care.